Mr. Byers, we do have a quorum now with you, representative for the AG, representative for DPS, and who else?
MCSO.
And MCSO. So yes, we need 4. We have 4.
Okay.
So we can proceed if you want.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Ask staff to call the roll.
Dave Byers,
Here.
Gene Bishop, Chris Mays,
Tom Rankin with the AGO's office appearing for Attorney General Mays.
Paul Penzone,
Phil Doherty for Paul Penzone.
Kara Riley, Jeff Glover.
Damon Cecil for DPS and Director Glover.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the November 8th meeting. They've been distributed ahead of time. Is there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I think we can just have them stand then as approved. As submitted. Okay, item number 3 is a voting item, and it's the awards, the grant awards for the 2024 Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control program cycle, and we'll turn it over to Tony.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members. Good afternoon. Item number 3 is a recommendation to the Commission for the award of the 2024 Arizona Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Cycle 37 grant funds as displayed in Table DC4 of your agenda to eligible criminal justice agencies for a period of July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024, except for the Attorney General Office's Medicaid Fraud Project, which will run from October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. I'll explain that as part of my presentation. You'll see up on the screen, or at least you should, for those online, a presentation that is going to walk you through the recommendation. It's basically a summary of the agenda, but just laid out in a way that we can quickly get through the numbers and the figures of the agenda. You see, we start off with the staff recommendation. This is recommending $8,985,069.77 for the 2024 Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Cycle 37 grant. As far as the details of the grant, next slide, please. You'll see a, hang on a second here. We're just making sure you're seeing what we're seeing.
Yeah, they see it. I need to.
A bit of a technical glitch here, members. If you give me just a second here to make sure that we have our technology in line. All right, Mr. Chairman, are you seeing a slide up there that says staff recommendation details purpose areas?
Yes.
All right, thank you. This breaks out the recommendation in purpose areas. Those purpose areas are laid out as part of the Burn Justice Assistance Grant, as well as in our solicitation, and they're in alignment with our 5-year statewide strategy. You can see for apprehension projects, we're recommending about 3.1 million, prosecution 3.4 million, about 637,000 for the AG statewide forfeiture project, 464,000 for forensic support projects, We have 3 of those. And then the drug adjudication project through the AOC, about $1.3 million. Next slide. Staff recommendation as far as fund sources go. We have 3 fund sources that we utilize for this grant program. One is the Burn Justice Assistance Grant. That's a federal grant that we apply for every year. We are recommending using $3,864,650.44 from that grant. We also have the Drug Enforcement Fund, which is a state fund. It gets its revenue from mandatory fines on certain drug offenses. That's $2,899,651.93. And then there's a 25% local match. That amounts to $2,220,767.39 for a total of $8,985,069.77. For the staff recommendation, as far as program size from year to year, this table here displays where we're going from our current fiscal year and the current awards in fiscal year 2023, and where we would go with the recommendation and the changes in the individual fund sources. You see the program size will drop about $297,000. That is mainly due to agencies that received the grant for fiscal year 2023 and did not apply for 2024. We do have one agency that applied for less money in 2024 than they received in 2023. We only give up to what they asked for. That makes up the $297,000 cut. As far as fund sources go, we're going to make a shift here. You see, we're recommending to spend $669,000 more than in the Burn Justice Assistance Grant than we did for 2023. And then a corresponding cut of about $892,000 coming from the Drug Enforcement Fund. The reason that we're doing that, making that shift, we're still seeing some revenue come in that we can't make a whole lot of sense of as far as the Drug Enforcement Fund. We know that we were going to see a drop in that fund because of marijuana legalization. Marijuana possession historically has been the driver of the revenue in that fund. And so clearly we knew we'd have a drop. We started to see a drop, and then there were some months where it was there was an increase, and it was an increase over what had been historically monthly collections over a period of years. That historical collection had been, prior to the legalization of marijuana, about $350,000 a month. We started to see amounts that were in the 200,000s range, and then some drop even below that in the 180s. So we knew that we were going to have to make a shift. We did see an April deposit of over $400,000. And so we're at a point here where we can't make a whole lot of sense yet. I think we need to go through another fiscal year to land on what the true impact of legalization has been on the DEA fund. And we have the federal funds. And so we're making the recommendation to spool up spending the federal dollars and pull back on the state funds for a little while. Hopefully we can see that stabilize, and we'll know more about the regular contribution of the DEA fund. And then the match is it's a 25% match. As the grant goes, the match goes. So as you see the program size of the grant drop, you'll see the match make a corresponding drop. As far as the expenditure types, this program focuses mainly on personnel costs. You see personal services, about $5.3 million we're recommending. ERE, $2.3 million. Overtime, which is for our task forces, about $120,000. By the way, that's one of the significant drivers of the drop in funding between this current fiscal year and the recommended next fiscal year. Professional outside services, about $1.1 million. And what that is are agencies that are participating on a task force. If if accounting wise, those are considered P&O expenses to us. The personal services and ERE are really the agency that we're providing the funding to, so the fiduciary. And so that's why you see that P&O number the way it is. It's task force members. And then a small equipment amount, about $14,000 for 2024. As far as the applications received, we opened the solicitation on, next slide, Matt, on January 30th, 2023, closed it on February 24th, 2023. We received 33 applications. 12 of those were apprehension projects, 16 prosecution projects, 1 statewide forfeiture project, and 3 forensic support, and then 1 drug adjudication project. Table DC3 of your agenda shows those grant requests and the amounts broken out by line item. Then we had those applications scored by a team of reviewers that applied the criteria of the grant program through a scoring rubric that is also included in the solicitation and made available to the applicants. Through the years, I've adhered to a recommendation allocation guideline. This is the same for those of you that have seen this recommendation before. It's the same. I change 1 or 2 items once in a while. This year, the only significant allocation guideline change I made was to try and provide level funding from 2023 to 2024 to all projects as a starting point, to at least be able to do that with the amount of funding that we had available. Next slide. This next slide are the recommendation considerations, and this is just elements of the recommendation that that I want you to be aware of, that you should adhere to. It does keep those projects funded at a level amount from 2023 to 2024. The AG's Medicaid fraud project does require a different grant period. It's according to the federal fiscal year, October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. That's because it's state money that you are awarding to the AG that they use as a match to a federal grant. And so it has to run concurrent with that federal grant, which is on a federal fiscal year. All other projects are state fiscal year, July 1st to June 30th. The recommendation does comply with ARS 412402. That's the authorizing statute for the Drug Enforcement Fund. That sets limits on the types of criminal justice functions that we can fund. It sets caps on them. I lay out those caps in the agenda if you want to know what those are, but this recommendation adheres to those caps. It does meet the federal burn JAG variable pass-through requirement. That is a grant requirement that is imposed on us when we use the federal burn JAG grant. We have to pass through 72.4% of those monies to local agencies. Historically, you have passed through either in the upper 70s or as much as the mid to upper 80s since I've been managing this program. This recommendation would pass through 86.5% of the funding. What is calculated as part of this is the funding that we use, a mixture of federal funds and state funds. And so if you're trying to work the numbers, for example, the AOC's project and the Medicaid fraud project, because they are state funds, they're not included in this calculation. The requirement is really a federal requirement. And so that's why if you're trying to work the numbers and trying to work how do we calculate 86.5%, that's why you won't, if you don't know that, you won't come out with the right percentage. It does meet the federal burn JAG requirement for funding what we call, or they call in the solicitation, the less than 10,000 jurisdictions. Burn JAG is a formula grant. it is based on a number of variables. One of those is UCR, then now NIBRS data and population, as well as a base amount. If those calculations come out with a number for a jurisdiction that reports into NIBRS or UCR at less than 10,000, the federal government will not directly award grants to that jurisdiction. All those other ones that are 10,000 or more, they apply directly to the federal government for a burn JAG award. What the federal government does is it collects all of those less than 10,000. It gives it to us, ACJC, as the SAA, and we've got a couple of options we can do with that money. We can award it directly to those less than 10,000 jurisdictions. If we do one, we have to do them all. Some of those awards are like for $15. Now, clearly, no one's going to do anything much with a $15 award, particularly when we impose the administrative requirements of that money on them. They'd be losing money. Or we can award it to a state police agency that provides a benefit to those less than 10,000 jurisdictions. That's what we do. That's what you've decided many, many years ago as the option, and we carried that option forward. And we award those monies to the DPS project. It's a forensic project that they provide services to all state agencies that come to them and might need forensic services. That amount was calculated for this grant at $202,929. And so if you look in the recommendation, you'll see DPS's award under the grant is more than that. And so we at least make sure they get that much or more in federal money. The reductions from the previous year. Again, you can look in the agenda if you want to see the specific agencies. The table DC1 shows the 2023 allocations and then the 2024 recommendations, and you can see who did not apply and the amount of funding that we're not using because they didn't apply in 2024. But it's Greenlee County SO that did not apply. Salt River Pima Maricopa Police Department did not apply. Santa Cruz County SO did not apply. And the Apache Junction Police Department did not apply. Yavapai County Attorney's Office was the one agency that applied for it in 2024, less money than they received in a grant in 2023. So it's sort of, they gave themselves a self-cut. And we did have one new project. It was a small project. If you remember, I mentioned about a $14,000 equipment line item recommendation. That is this project from Pinal County SO. They submitted a forensic project for some forensic related equipment, and we're including that in our recommendation. And finally, I will leave you members with the recommendation that we started off with. I do that so that you will see the language. I would appreciate it if we had these elements in any motion that you might consider. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions.
All right, members. First of all, staff, please note that Commissioner Gene Bishop joined the group after we did the roll call. Group, do you have any questions for Tony? Hearing none, do we have a motion? There is a recommended motion on in the agenda materials labeled recommended action if somebody wants to make that particular motion.
Yeah, this is Phil Doherty. I'll go ahead and make the recommendation. The Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Committee recommend to the Commission the award of $8,985,069.77 for fiscal year 2024. Arizona Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Cycle 37 grant program as displayed in Table DC4 of the JIMA to eligible criminal justice agencies for the period of beginning July 1, 23 and ending June 30th, 24, except the Attorney General's Office Medicaid Fraud Project, which will be funded from October 1st, 2023 and into September 30th, 24.
All right, members, you've heard the motion. Do we have a second?
Gene Bishop, I second that.
All right, and Gene, I see your hand is up. Did you have a question or were you?
Yeah, I've got my hand up too.
No question. I just wanted to do the second.
All right. So we've had a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, if we,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, this is Tom Rankin with the AG's office.
Hi, Tom. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So first of all, I just want to say we're absolutely grateful that we've been receiving this grant funding for the last 30 plus years, including in the last several years. I just want to raise a point that we also raised last year, that the amount of funding that's proposed for the statewide forfeiture program has remained the same, not just for the proposed 24, but also for 23 and for 22 before it. Our concern about this is that during the last fiscal year, in the middle of the fiscal year, there were statewide salary increases that were made that were applied across the board, including to the folks involved in our grant request for attorney positions, property management, whatnot. Occurring in the middle of the year, we were not able to cover the increases in the personnel with the existing grant amounts. So what we had to do was we had a vacancy in one of the attorney positions, and we had to use funding for the program, but our allocation would have gone to this attorney position. We were unable to fill that position because funds for that position were used to make up the shortfall for the other existing positions. So when we applied this year in our application, as we've done in previous years, we've received copies of the scores and comments from ACJC, and very thorough, wonderful job, useful comments. We take those to heart. We incorporate those into our review and preparation process for our grant application, and try to find ways that we can incorporate any shortfalls or less than ideal scores in different categories and determine how we can, improve on that with our grant proposal for the coming year. And we did that again this year. So we appreciate those comments. The other thing we pointed out was that due to the legislative changes to the forfeiture statutes and certain counties deciding to take a hiatus from engaging in this kind of law enforcement tool, we stepped up and we ended up taking on cases from several counties that used to be a very productive member of enforcement in that area, and then a couple counties who weren't doing it. And we ended up taking on cases for 10 of the 15 counties last year to make up for the shortfall that they were causing is maybe too strong a word, but as a result of them waiting to find out how these cases are going to play out. We then were active in litigation and including some appellate challenges to the new statutes to get trial court and appellate court decisions, clarifying, if not going with the state on the interpretation for these statutes. So we did that. Then when we made our grant application for fiscal 24, we made a true and accurate request for the amount of funds it would take to fund the section that's doing this work, including the position that we had to kind of forego last year. And because you're proposing to keep the funding at the same level as the previous 2 years, we're now again experiencing the same sort of deficit in funding requested to the tune of about $69,000-$70,000, which may or certainly likely will result in not being able to fund that position at all going forward through fiscal year 24 in a period where we're still going to incur additional cases from counties that aren't continuing to do this work or are kind of sitting out another year while more decisions get made in the court. So obviously our request would be to fully fund the statewide forfeiture program at the $707,000 requested level, because it's strictly personnel. It's not equipment, services. Our office absorbs those costs as part of our in-kind kind of contribution to the work. versus the 637,000 that is once again the figure. And, listening to the presentation and looking through it with an emphasis on personnel, but also noticing that there were some reductions from the previous grant year for the counties that you pointed out that didn't reapply for funds. But it seems like those funds weren't considered for reallocation into the program for which we anticipated deficit in 24 and experienced one in fiscal 23. So, we are asking the committee, the commission to consider such a change. We're not withholding a recommendation to pass this forward to the full committee, but along with our assent to the recommendation to the full committee, it would be with reserve for the Attorney General at the executive meeting when they act on actually adopting the recommendations and passing the awards, with reserve for them to have a discussion on that at the appropriate time of that agenda.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Tony, a question and maybe a response. I was trying to look at all the materials. I can't tell, maybe it's here somewhere. Do we have a balance because of the counties that requested less money or no money? Do we have any surplus funds left to be able to distribute?
Well, Mr. Chairman, members, there is a balance in the Drug Enforcement Fund. I don't have it in front of me. And there are unexpended burn grant funds. The problem with spending those today means that we likely will experience a greater adjustment at some point in the future. We take what money is on account in the DEA fund and what grant funds we have available. We take that into account when we're making a current year's recommendation. You are going to see a drop in this grant at some point. The question is, are we driving off a cliff or are we going to make a soft landing? And we work really hard to form out a plan, maybe 3 or 5 years into the future, that will allow for us to make a soft landing instead of driving us off a cliff. I think in fairness, what Mr. Rankin has pointed out, although he did so much in much better detail than maybe some of our applicants if they were in this room and they would make. But his challenge is the same challenge of all the applicants that applied. It may not be the specific types of expenses or the amounts, but it's really the same. And really what tells you that is if you look at the table on DC1, here's the challenge that we have. We have, as staff, to make a recommendation to you, we have about $15.9 million in requests that we have to figure out how to fit into that strategic spending amount, which we've determined to be about 8.9 or just under $9 million. That's really the challenge here. So absolutely, you can move money around in this recommendation to stay in the $8.985 million box. You can have us adjust the recommendation up and add money. That certainly would require us to make sure we're not exceeding any amount of funding available. Or that could be done at the commission level. When the commission meets, they can hear the recommendation. I think it is absolutely appropriate and healthy to hear Mr. Rankin's comments and his concerns, and have the commission decide at that point if they would like to do that. If this committee feels that they're the appropriate group to make that decision. But I emphasize to you, when you're looking at covering cost increases, you have about 33 projects here that all had cost increases. If I'm going to do it for one agency, do I do it for all? If I do it for only a small select group of agencies, which ones? You would have to give me direction and guidance on that. And then the second area of consideration that I would make to you is please be careful about that cliff. You are going to have less money in this grant. What if you decide to accelerate spending in 2024? That will have an impact on our plan that we lay out for the future. I'm anticipating in 2025 that will be the first year that we have reductions in this grant program. I would be surprised if we saw a burn justice assistance grant that was as large as this last one. This last one was about 4.1 million that we received. I think that's going to be less for the federal fiscal year 2023 grant that they give us. I still have some significant concerns about the DEA fund. Going from 2022 to 2023, there was a 20% drop in revenue. Going from 2021 to 2022, there was a 20% drop in revenue. Over a 2-year period, the DEA fund, which, by the way, had been carrying the load for funding in this program until this recommendation, has taken on a 40% cut in a 2-year period. I am not convinced that we're done seeing the reduction in those revenues and see a floor here. So there's unknowns going on, and that is also factored into our recommendation. And so I leave it up to the committee to decide which way to go. But certainly what Mr. Rankin has said is a problem. If you think the solution to these budget issues are the DEA fund and the Burn Justice Assistance Grant, this is the former fiscal analyst in me coming out. That is a house built on sand right now, and I would not recommend pushing those balances too much. But I leave that up to you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Yeah, so I was going to raise, now that Mr. Rankin brought it up, I was going to say the same thing. The courts also have had from last year salary increases. But if you look at the chart on DC1, it's pretty clear that everybody together everybody wants an increase. And there'd be no way to cover that, be a $15 million.
Mr. Chairman, I know you don't have the details of those requests, but I can tell you the reviewers look at those budgets very carefully. So does the drug program staff, and so do I. I look at those and I scrutinize those. I try and pick out where there's fat, where there's waste. I can tell you that those requests for 2024 are very solid requests. My impression is we do not have the revenue in this program to support actual cost increases of doing the work of these grant programs. We don't have it today. I likely, Mr. Chairman, if we funded the 15.8 million, you would eat up all of the balance that we have, and you probably would have a program size next year that is about 3 or 4 million in grant funds instead of 7 or 8 million.
Yeah, I understand. So we really don't have the money. We do have the detailed grant because we have the 24 grant request, which total 15.8 million. Now we don't have the details below that. But I guess what really we're doing is all of us are having to eat cost of living increases and salary increases. And so, and also the commissions, it's not likely to tinker with this at the full commission meeting. They expect us to do this at the committee level. So we need to decide what we want to recommend here. I think all of us are having to go to other sources of money to fill in the gaps that have developed over the years and these grants where we're not getting the full amount. I don't know, does the AG still have a RICO fund, for example, or do you have other funds that you could use to cover that 70,000?
Well, the problem there is part of the legislative changes that occurred very quietly a couple years ago, not in the last large reformation, if you will. I don't know what motivated it, but a couple years ago, the legislature changed some language in the revolving fund statutes that said as of August of 2024, the Attorney General's office, just the Attorney General's office, can no longer use any funds in the revolving fund to pay for salaries. So it kind of kicked the can down the road a few years into the new administration, of course. But as of August of 2024, the office will no longer be able to use revolving fund monies for salaries. And there were any number of people on salary from the revolving fund, and still the new AG is working on a way to fund the people who are currently on the revolving fund but won't be able to come the end of 2024. So that's an additional kind of pressure point we're facing on that. You know, getting people off and then working under a construct where we can't use the salaries by virtue of the statutory prohibition.
Well, do you see the problem, though, that ACJC has? If you look at that DC1 chart, you could take like the courts. We asked for 1.8 million, which would predominantly be increased cost of salaries throughout the system, but we're going to get 1.3, so we're 500,000 short. You're 70,000. You look at DPS wants 700,000. They're going to get not even 400. And so, if we did this for the AG, how do we not do it for everybody? Everybody has the exact same problem you have.
Well, and Mr. Chair, that you're exactly right. That's why I prefaced my comments with, you know, I spoke to this last year and perhaps the year before, and I understand that's an issue. But just speaking on behalf of the AG, I could just convey what I had with respect to that. And again, not going to hold up the recommendation and the motions for adopting to recommend as proposed, but with leave for if the Attorney General sees fit to discuss it at the executive committee meeting where they take final action.
Well, you're talking about the full public commission meeting.
Yeah, that's right. Full commission.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing, though, that we'll see what people want to do on this, but please advise her that would turn into a free-for-all, because everybody who's on the commission then who represents these groups are going to say the same thing. I don't know how the full commission could reach in after we make our recommendation and say, well, let's give 70,000 to the AG without DPS saying, well, I want more, or the courts more. You know, it doesn't seem like a practical way to deal with the business when it gets to the full commission meeting. Tony, why do we, I see what you've done here is we get these requests, they're all higher, almost, but then you award the same amount as last year. Why do we kind of tempt people in the grant request proposal? Why don't we say that your grant request can't exceed last year's funding? Because it seems like a big waste. Everybody goes and updates their numbers. You look at them and say, they're great, but we don't have the money, so we give you last year's amount. Seems like kind of a wasted process to me. Is there a way to just...
It's a real good question, Mr. Chairman. It's a matter of timing. The timing of when we get these grant requests in and the timing of when we know as staff how much revenue we're working with. For example, if we used your approach, Mr. Chairman, we would not have given increases to agents. I think we gave increases last year. I think last year for 2023, we had some significant increases in 2023. If we would have used your approach, we would have had the money, but we wouldn't have made those grant increases, because in the solicitation, we would have commanded agencies when they apply to only apply for a certain amount. We would have capped it. Now you could have used that money that we then we didn't expend in 2023 in a future fiscal year. That's true. And so you could play that game where you're capping in the solicitation. And when you do have money, you increase your cap for the following offering. So that's possible to do. But the short answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, is by the time we get grant requests in, I'm not totally sure with the amount of revenue I'm working with. I learned that sometime after applications are submitted, when we finalize the boxes of money we're dealing with. And really, the one that's the X factor is the DEA fund. The burn grant's easy because it's a grant. We already have it in the bank. The DEA fund, it's a volatile fund, and we just cannot make predictions that are reliable at all. And so we have to wait until a point in time when we know we have the revenue, when we've received it in the DEA fund, and that's why.
Okay. All right. Well, you've heard the AG's request. Members, what's your thoughts?
I'll go ahead and
You have
chime
a
in, I guess.
motion out there, Mr. Chairman, as well. You have a motion out there as well.
Yeah, but the AG, I guess, I mean, I think his point is almost like, well, it could be a motion to amend the motion.
Yes, that's what you would need, Mr. Chairman.
So if I think, frankly, if you really want the 70,000, you got to amend this motion now. It wouldn't make sense to me to try to do it at the commission level. Phil, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in and say my thoughts. I'm unfortunate, I understand the AG's position. Again, like you said, a lot of us are in the same position. We have this fund that's going to need to be fiscally sound for as long as we can make it, with the expectation of some cuts in the next future allocation. So I still stand on the recommendation that I read. And we move forward with that. Again, I understand the AG's position, but I think we need to be fair across the board to everybody.
And Mr. Chair, I am not going to make a motion to amend the motion that's been seconded before this group.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion then on the motion that's been made? All right. If not, then all in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say no. Fine. So our recommendation to the commission passes unanimously, and it'll be then taken up by the commission at the next meeting. Next item on the agenda is item number 4, which is the Residential Substance Abuse and Treatment Program. Tony.
Mr. Chairman, item 4 of the agenda is a recommendation from the committee to the commission in the award of $475,645.76 in federal and local cash match funds for the FY 2024 Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Grant Program, beginning July 1st, 2023, and ending June 30th, 2024, as shown in Table DC2 of the agenda. As far as the recommended projects go, we had 4 applicants: Department of Corrections, Department of Juvenile Corrections, Chicanos Port La Casa, and Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. They were recommending a total of $475,645.77. Actually, by the way, if you see cents differences. Those are rounding errors from the systems that we're drawing the information from. My great programmer has not figured out a way to solve the cents rounding error problem. This grant requires a 25% match. It is a federal grant that we get. There are no state funds that we use for this grant program. In your agenda on table DC2, we have the funding sources broken out. You're going to see a different problem in this grant than you did in the last grant. I wish we could use this money as a resolution of the issues that we had in the last agenda item, but we cannot. You will see for the 2024 program, the money we had available totaled about $2.8 million. We have a 19 grant, a 20 grant, a 21 grant, and a 2022 grant currently from the federal government that we are working with. For the program size, you see the total grant amount requested and recommended from programs is $356,734.32. You add in their local match of 25%, that's $118,911.44 for the total program size of $475,645.76. For future projects, where does that leave us? You start out at the $2.8 million. You subtract out what we will use for the FY 2024 RSAT grant program of $356,000. That leaves us with about $2.5 million. As far as who applied, I mentioned Department of Corrections, Juvenile Corrections, Chicanos, Port Lacrosse, and the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. That grant opened on January 30th and closed on March 10th. On table DC2, there's a breakout of the line items that they applied for. You can see that what they applied for is what we're recommending. Applications were again scored by a team of evaluators, as were the drug grants. And finally, Mr. Chairman, we have the recommendation by staff. Once again, the Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Committee recommends to the Commission the award of $475,645.76 in federal and local cash match funds for the FY 2024 Residential Substance Abuse Treatment Grant Program, beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024, as shown in table DC2 of the agenda. Before we talk about a motion and moving forward with this item, I just wanted to mention that roughly $5 million that we have available. We have been in some discussions with the Department of Corrections. They have a desire to implement a medication-assisted treatment program in the prison. These funds are available. They did not submit a project that was a MAT project. They're not ready to do that. They're still sort of working through how they would roll that out. But I want to emphasize to you that over the last several fiscal years, we have went out and made eligible agencies, which are prisons and jails and nonprofits that could provide post-release treatment, that these monies were available. You, as a group, talked about this. We presented this and asked you for some thoughts on some direction. The direction you gave us at that time was to go back to the projects that we were funding and make them emphasize to them that there was funding available and they should apply for the funding to meet their needs. We did that. Very enthusiastically, we did that. Very aggressively, we did that. What we got back was pretty much what we had been getting, which is a stable request. On one hand, that's a good thing. I think these are honest requests for resources. On the other, it continues the challenge of we're getting supplies of this grant, and the revenue that's coming in is far outpacing the amount or the need of the projects that exist that use these funds. You can see the FY 2022 grant was $1,044,000. and we're spending roughly $350,000 in grant funds a year on average. So we may come back to you with a special project request from the Department of Corrections if they in fact decide to move forward and utilize some of this remaining balance for that medication-assisted treatment implementation. All of these grants have a clock ticking on them. The 2019 monies expired September 30th of this year, so we have to figure out a way to spend those in a hurry. That's difficult to do when you need to spend $284,000, and agencies have requested a total of $356,000 for the entire year. And so we need to come up with some way to productively and effectively spend these monies in Arizona. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, members, the solution to that is not going to be finding new grant projects to come forward. We've done that now for at least the third year in a row, and sometimes reaching directly out to sheriff's departments is really where you could get new projects. In fairness to those agencies, it is a risky game to stand up a residential substance abuse treatment program using primarily 75% federal funds and then rely on those federal funds being around. What happens when you do that and you have inmates that you're treating and the feds cut the grant, which has happened to this grant? I think we went from $1 million a year grant to about a $300,000 or $250,000 grant for the entire state. And it stayed that way for a period of years with this grant. So there is some history of that being an extreme risk. You really have to have a good plan in place on how you are going to transition from these grant funds and using local funds to support that effort. And that is just not easy to do. And so I make that comment to you to let you know that likely we will bring to you a request to spend some of those monies with a MAT effort, which is an excellent idea, supported enthusiastically by RSAT. RSAT does have a reauthorization out there, which would allow for an expansion of the kinds of things that we could fund. That reauthorization, I think, has been bouncing around Congress for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years. It likely is not going to get done again. I think the holdup is in the House. The Senate has kicked it to the House the last couple of years, and it's stalled out in the House. I think that will happen again this year with reauthorization. So there are no easy answers to spending this money outside of what may be a very viable option with the Department of Corrections. With that, I'm available for questions, Mr. Chairman, members.
Tony, I've not served on this committee before, so I wasn't familiar with this particular project. I run the juvenile detention centers in the state, and we also have kids placed, hundreds of kids on any given day in residential treatment programs. Substance abuse is probably the #1 issue for them. Are they eligible? Would our juvenile detention centers or our residential be eligible?
Mr. Chairman, if it is a residential program put on by a nonprofit that has a number of different types of individuals that are part of that residential program, no, it would not. In the agenda, we summarized for you what a residential program is and a jail-based program. A residential program has to meet certain criteria, a jail-based certain criteria. And then we have the post-release option that exists, which is really an organization outside of the jail or prison that is providing services to someone that received those services inside the jail or prison in a residential setting. And so the answer is, what's that, Mr. Chairman?
Considered a jail program?
Would say that again, Mr. Chairman? You broke up.
Well, we run the juvenile detention, the secure detention facilities. Would that qualify as a jail-based program?
A juvenile detention center would likely be considered a residential by VJA. Jail-based is just that, jail. Department of Juvenile Corrections has a grant from this program. It is considered a residential program. The difference is the length of treatment in between residential and jail. Residential requires 6 months. It requires, though, in addition to that, that the population be segmented off from the general population. Jail-based is a 3-month minimum. It only requires that, if possible, the treatment population be segmented off, but it doesn't have to be, because they recognize the transit nature of jails versus the residential or prison-based projects. And so, Mr. Chairman, it would depend on the characteristics of those detention facilities, those juvenile detention facilities, and what they could offer in falling under the guidelines of a residential program.
All right. Any questions or comments from the committee members? If not, can we get someone to make the motion that's been recommended, or an alternative?
I'll go ahead. This is Phil Doherty.
Go ahead, Phil.
So I'll recommend the Drug, Gang, and Violent Crime Control Committee recommend to the commission the award of $475,645.76 in federal and local cash match funds for the fiscal year 2024 residential substance abuse treatment grant program, beginning July 1st, 23 and ending June 30th, 24, as shown in table DC2 of the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Okay, the motion carries. Let's see, we're down to the call of the public. I don't see any public members online. Is there anyone at the ACJC conference room?
Mr. Chairman, no. I do have a brief update, though, for you.
All right, and why don't you go ahead with the update?
Mr. Chairman, members, we have finalized for the State Crisis Intervention Program, the advisory board. We have 13 individuals in place that meet the requirements of that grant as far as the types of agencies they represent. We are looking for a date right now to have that initial meeting. At that meeting, our plan is to figure out the final details of a competitive grant solicitation and whether the advisory board wants to fund any other types of projects outside of a competitive grant approach, and then move forward with that process. And so I just wanted to make you all aware of that we took some time to get the pieces together. We've done that, and we're looking for a date to have that first meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from any members of the committee? All right, if not, it looks like our next meeting will be at the call of the chair. If there's no other business, we are adjourned. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, members.
Thank you.